Greetings, listeners, and welcome to the 20th episode of the Heavy Newfoundland podcast. Yes, you heard that correctly. We are on the 20th episode of this. It's a number that I never ever thought I'd actually get to, so I'm just as surprised as you are. But we have a very special episode for you tonight because we actually have our very first audio interview on this podcast. The interview was with a gentleman by the name of Richard Furey. He is the creator of a video game by the name of Swarm, which you might have heard of. He's also the head of a game design studio called PolyHeart, who are the ones who are designing Swarm. It's essentially a Doom-esque first-person shooter rooted in the sci-fi genre, and as well as horror, I guess you could say. And the interesting thing about this game is that it's essentially got a soundtrack comprised of a heavy metal choir featuring many of the frontmen and frontwomen of local metal bands in St. John's, which is absolutely phenomenal. I think it's a brilliant and really interesting idea, and it's so cool to see the melding of these two mediums, the video game world in St. John's meeting the music world in St. John's. Now that is really, really cool. So we're not going to play any actual music for you on this episode outside of course, the intro track. We're just going to jump right into the interview. So without further ado, this is myself and my interview with Richard Furey of PolyHeart. Hello.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, awesome. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's fine.
No problem. So, how are you doing today, Richard?
Oh, I'm doing, just the usual. I'm just bored. I've been working on getting some things set up for Swarm, actually.
Okay, cool. Like what, for example?
Well, the band list. I've been discussing with one of the artists about the logo design and a bunch of other things. And I've been looking at budgeting and doing whatever I can at this point.
Okay, right on. That's awesome. Well, I guess just to start things off, why don't you tell the people out there who may be listening to this exactly who you are and the company that you work for, PolyHeart.
All right, so I'm Richard Furey. I'm 19 years old. I'm a college student going into sound production and recording. Hopefully, this whole COVID shit didn't screw it up. So I am an entrepreneur who created Romeo and Juliet games at the start of 2020, but unfortunately, due to financial and copyright circumstances, I shifted the name to PolyHeart, and I regrouped with only a handful of the devs that I had, and we decided that we were going to focus entirely on making 90s-based games instead of trying to publish a ton of different styles of games. So, PolyHeart is a modern 90s-based studio, similar to how it was back in the day. We do 90s first-person shooters mostly, but we will tap into other genres such as horror.
Right, awesome. Well, that's actually really interesting to me personally because I am a huge fan of a lot of games that came out in that era. I believe the last time we spoke, I mentioned Medieval, which, of course, is not... I don't know if you technically consider that a 90s game because it came out in 1999, I believe, but still, I have a huge place in my heart, personally, for just the 90s era of video games in general, like the Sony PlayStation, the Nintendo 64, that kind of stuff. So it's really interesting to me that you're trying to do this, I guess, 90s revival sort of thing. So have you guys, before Swarm became an entity, what other games had you guys worked on before?
We were working on Evil, which basically helped set the stage for Swarm. And Evil was going to be a 90s style Doom Eternal in a way, but it was going to have sort of its own thing going on.
Right.
But we realized the scale of a starting project that huge was way out of our budget. So we decided to scale it down, take what we liked from Evil, and sort of put it into the works for Swarm.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I myself have a Nintendo 64, and I downloaded all the original Quakes and Dooms on Steam, so I basically force my developers before we start working on the mechanics of the game to play through the original 8 episodes of the classic Doom,
Nice.
and the level of Quake, which really helps us get a idea of the style of Doom we're looking for, and helps keep developers in the mindset of this sort of game.
All right, awesome. So I guess that leads me to my next question then, because Swarm is the game that you guys are working on right now. It's the one that you're clearly putting the most effort into. So what's the basic premise of it? Because you mentioned before that the last time we spoke, at least, that it's going to be very inspired by games like Doom. You mentioned that earlier, just a minute ago. So what is the basic premise of this game?
So the basic premise of this game is, instead of just being a nostalgic trip, which is what some 90s shooters made in today are, it's going to be more of a love letter back to 90s shooters. It's not going to try to be modern. It's going to try to replicate the style of the 90s in its own style. And yes, it is based off of games like Doom, Quake, Wolfenstein, Heretic, Blood. All the very fast-paced, loved first-person shooters for anyone who was fans of them. And we feel like Swarm will, fall in line with those, not in terms of, how they work, which they're considered some of the best FPS shooters of all time. But I do feel that fans will like it if they like, all these older games, because it has a very similar play style to it.
Sweet. So that covers, I guess, the style of the game. What you guys are going for. Are you able to reveal anything about the plot or the story about it yet, or is that still something that's very under wraps for right now?
It's still very under wraps, but the basic premise we're going for is that you're a time traveler who ended up in an alternate dimension somehow. We don't exactly know how yet, but basically you're on this alternate version of Earth that's under attack by this, very aggressive alien race, and you have to basically kill all the aliens and attack the mother brain to basically get back home.
That's really awesome, because it definitely harkens back to a lot of games that came out in that era that you're talking about. Like, I'm immediately reminded of stuff like Duke Nukem or the first Half-Life. Of course, going up to like the mothership, or I guess in Half-Life's case, you're going to like that other dimension, where the Zen are from, or you're going to the planet called Zen and dealing with those aliens. It definitely reminds me of that. So that's really cool. Are you guys going for like a similar art style to that as well, like with the polygonal shapes, and I guess kind of in terms of like I guess for what I could relate it to in terms of music, are you going for kind of more of a lo-fi aesthetic with this game?
No, actually. So, as surprising as it is, this game doesn't really tamper on the edge of lo-fi. It's very aggressive. The models are sort of HD low poly, so like if the 90s games were actually made today, it's not going to look modern, it's going to look 90s, but it's going to have much cleaner poly than Dusk. Dusk looks old. Right. We're not going to go too old. We're going to be more in the realm of, like, Wrath, Aeon of Ruin, and a Medieval, some of a bit more higher quality, but we're still looking at keeping it more authentic to 90s style. And as for the music's very metal. It's very aggressive at times. And
well, that's definitely the important part for us.
Yeah, and just like Doom Eternal, there are some dynamics in the music, so it won't just be constant metal throughout the level. Mm-hmm. There will be very well-crafted ambience depending on which level you're in.
Cool. So with the soundtrack then, it definitely makes sense that, not everything is just like this hard pounding, thrashing metal music going on the entire time. I do feel like you're right, that would get a bit old, and it doesn't necessarily thematically suit every segment of a video game, right? But when it comes to... sorry, go ahead.
Sorry for cutting you off there. Before COVID hit, I actually worked for a film company called the Newfoundland Independent Film Co-op.
Okay.
And I actually took a first-time filmmaker's course, and we were almost in the process of shooting some footage for our first short film before this hit. And one of the things we were taught about sound is that to have a continuous soundtrack throughout a movie is, basically the opposite of what you want, because it sort of downplays, the more dramatic scenes, and it continuously tries to tell you what to feel. And for a lot of big movie goers, that can get very annoying very quickly. So, there is some dynamic flow in between, because what's the point of having, this very aggressive metal synth mix that's more tailored towards metal than synth. So it's, a lot more metal than Doom Eternal. But why walk through, especially in Hellbound after you've killed everything? Like, shout out to Cybot Studios. They made an amazing game. I love Hellbound. But, when everything's killed and you're just hearing this very, aggressive metal soundtrack and there's nothing going on, it gets very old. It just sounds, completely out of place.
Yeah, I do agree. And when you're talking about movies like that, I'm instantly reminded of a film like, for example, Suicide Squad, where the entire soundtrack is basically just top 40 pop hits or songs that are just very obvious for the characters that are on film. I mean, I'm not going to get into that movie because I'm sure most people know that it was a steaming pile of crap. But that to me is a perfect example of what not to do when it comes to soundtracks. So I'm glad that you guys are taking that approach when it comes to developing the music for this game. But the interesting thing to me is, of course, what everyone probably knows about this game already, at least the people who are listening to this interview and this podcast, is the heavy metal choir. So getting into that, how exactly did you guys come up with that idea to have not just a metal music soundtrack, but having an actual choir of all of these local musicians in your game? Where did that idea come from?
All right, so I'm going to be honest, I stole the idea from Mick Gordon. He's one of my biggest sound production inspirations. I love his work. I love his mixing. He makes very good music, not just for Doom, but he made very good music for the newest Prey game. I love his work on Wolfenstein, how he's able to really capture the era that the new Wolfenstein takes place in, with the older sounding jazz and stuff like that. And I also love his work way back when. He actually did some of the sound production, I think, for Destroy All Humans 2.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. It's up on his website, actually. I think it's Destroy All Humans 1 or 2, but he actually did work on the sound design for that.
That game is awesome.
Yeah. But no. So, when I went into the, Doom Eternal thing, saw that they had a heavy metal choir, it kind of reminded me, at the time we were working on Evil, and it kind of reminded me that, that was made up of a group of people who were paid, but unfortunately we didn't have that kind of money. So we wanted to do something as cool as Mick did, but, with a very limited budget, we didn't know where to turn. So I literally just looked up Newfoundland local metal bands. I went on Facebook and looked up, Newfoundland metal, and I sort of scrolled through all these names. There are quite a few people who haven't responded to me since I first contacted them back in January, February. But we do have a very large amount of support. We basically reached out to them, and I said, hey, we're R&D Games, which is now PolyHeart, but at the time it was Romeo and Juliet Games, and we're a startup company in St. John's, Newfoundland, and we're putting together a volunteer heavy metal choir, and we would like you to join. And most of them were like, yeah, that sounds awesome, Most of them were just bands I contacted. Some were recommended to me. A lot of the bands are local, but we did actually reach out to a couple of bands in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, other areas of Canada that are relatively close by. and they're also interested. So that's basically how that all started, and now we're up to over 35 vocalists who are willing to participate in the choir.
That's really really awesome, and I'm super stoked that you've actually managed to get that many people from the local scene, as well as in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, like I said, who are interested in participating in this. Are you able to actually reveal anyone specific who's actually said yes to participating in this project?
I have the names of 30 bands. Some have multiple singers, some have one singer that's tied to multiple bands, but so far out of these 30 bands, because we've contacted people, like Jimmy Jones and the Kool-Aid Jammers, but they said they didn't respond after. But we got a lot of positive feedback, even from bands who weren't able to join. But the 30 I can say we do have. Shout out to all these bands. Category VI, Sons of an Eastern Moon, Black Market Hard Attack, which is a non-metal band, Slowpoke, Benedict Drinks, which is also a non-metal band, Chain of Links, Ultimata, Wiremouth, which is my brother Ryan's band,
Oh, cool.
Most Likely Forever, Last Cigar, The Combine, Disposition, Hamaisha, Pearl, I'm sorry if I butchered that last name, by the way, Mistwalker, The Crunge, Devastator, Sea Dogs, Dead Inner Youth, The Fabulous Killjoys, which is obviously an MCR cover band, Thrones, Doom and Blue, Here is Heroes, Diner Drugs, Dogs of Sun, Counter Clockwork, Dumpster Mummy, Doom Machine, Delhi Van Gogh, and Metal Militia, which is a Metallica cover band.
Wow, that is a lot of bands. That's honestly really, really impressive. So I guess my next question is because you have some bands here that I've noticed who are. I know it's mostly vocalists who you are looking to get on board for this project, because again you're going for that choir thing that you mentioned before. But for example, a band like Doom and Blue, which is they have like a rotating door, a revolving door of guest vocalists, right? So are you also looking for musicians to actually record like the guitar tracks and drum tracks and stuff like that for the soundtrack itself?
Alright, see, so what we actually have planned is I'm part of the Doom 2016 Eternal Fan Club and the Doom Repository, and there were 3 artists on these groups who made music that was very similar to Doom Eternal. They have skill with the guitar, and they make, if not the cleanest, very clean mixes. And their soundtracks just sound wicked. So I reached out to them and asked them if they wanted to produce music for Evil, and they said yes. They'd love to be a part of this project for absolutely free.
That's awesome.
So they're actually going to do most of this. My music team, which is both international and local, are actually going to do most of the sound mixing and the soundtrack and the sound design and all of that. And we also have a couple of folio artists who are going to do actual sound effects for the game. So everything, when a bone breaks in game, it's actually like a clean sound effect and not just some sound library copy paste. We're looking to create 100% of our own assets, which includes, the logos, the visuals, the textures. Everything in game is created entirely by us, so we can technically say we own all the intellectual property of our game. And it's just a hold on. I'm trying to find the words, but I can't find any words.
No problem. I understand.
It's just really great.
Yeah.
And in accordance to other musicians, we're always asking our current selection of vocalists that if they know anybody who's interested, or if anybody listening to this podcast wants to also contribute their vocals, whether local or otherwise, they're free to contact me through Messenger, through my email, through Discord, whatever they want, and even my number. If they somehow get a hold of that, and they're free to join the choir. At some point we will have to cut it off and say that people aren't allowed to join because we don't want this to be too massive. But we are looking into getting a choir director, and there's currently talks with the studio about letting us use their space for free, so we won't even have to pay for the session.
Wow.
Which is another bonus for our startup company.
That's really, really cool. So yeah, that does actually bring me to my next question of with all of these musicians, how you're actually going to coordinate it, right? So if you're having a space and a choir director, like you actually physically want to get as many of these vocalists as possible into a room together, right? And then actually doing the performing all at once. That's the general gist of this.
We do have a ton of things. Yes, there will be some performances that are done. We have chants and certain vocals and stuff like that we need everybody to do. But then we also have gender specific. We have genre specific. We have mostly males in our choir, but we will have some maybe female leading at certain parts. And another cool thing we plan to do is, since metal vocalists' voices are usually, unique and experimental in their own style, we plan to use some of their vocals as, sounds for the enemies in the game.
Oh, no, that's really cool.
Where they wouldn't speak English, where their language would be completely different. It also makes them a little more intimidating when, this thing just pops out of the black and just starts screaming at you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I can imagine myself just playing this game, and then one thing I feel like I'll notice, because a lot of the bands you mentioned, either I know their vocalist personally or I've seen them perform before, so I feel like I can play this game and then hear a sound effect like you just talked about from one of the enemies or something, and be like, hey, I know who made that. That sounds exactly like, I don't know, Amanda from Category 6 or Chris from Sons of an Easter Moon or something. I think that'll be a really fun aspect for people who are from Newfoundland or from the metal scene who are playing this game after it's done. Just having that little bit of an Easter egg in there, That's really cool.
Yeah. We're trying to stray away from making it seem like jump scares, though, because they're not meant to be jump scares. They're just meant to make the game sound more unique and more metal. Because we really want to capture the spirit of the 90s. And one thing that Dusk did that most other games don't do is recapture, the metal. Because unless you were playing Heretic, even Wolfenstein's track had a very underlying, aggressive tone to it.
Mm-hmm.
And Doom really captivated on that by Bobby Prince actually making songs based on real metal songs. So, we want to bring that. Since the 90s was considered, the era that metal basically started, the 80s and 90s, we want to recapture that feeling of just pure adrenaline when you're in, these arenas combating, enemies. But then we also want the ambience and certain parts of the music, like the synthy parts, to be more unique to the game itself and sort of capture that more 80s time traveler vibe, while not making it seem like a totally lo-fi or, synth-based game. One of the biggest complaints about Doom Eternal was that since Mick Gordon didn't have complete control over his music, he wasn't able to just completely slap guitars into there and make it, really metal. But he tried his best, and it still came out sounding really good. But our soundtrack isn't going to be nearly as synthy. It's going to focus a lot more on raw metal, the thrash and the heavy genres mostly. But we will have a few unique surprises in there that people aren't expecting in terms of sound mixing. The ambience is going to be a lot like Quake, where it's very industrial and it's very, atmospheric.
See, that's really interesting to me as well, because I wanted to ask if there's any, specific metal bands that you're looking at for inspiration, like for the people who are actually developing the musical aspect of this, like the instrumental part of the soundtrack. So is there any specific bands that you're looking at, or is it more or less you're just trying to capture that general feeling of the aggression and the high octane speed of a lot of that?
Our biggest inspiration, turned to none other than Doom Eternal, because some of the metal in that game goes absolutely beyond, and it sounds just amazing what Mick did with the 7 and 8 string guitars. We don't really have any super band influences, but you can say for the ambience, we sort of turn to like Audrey Robs. I know that's completely wrong. Aubrey Rogers, I meant to say. And Nine Inch Nails, who are always, Trent Reznor is a very, very good musician.
Absolutely agreed.
Yes. And, we're sort of looking at his new Ghosts 5 and 6, for example. We're looking at taking some of the more unique parts of his ambience, like the Quake soundtrack, and not reusing anything, because we want to make everything ourselves, but sort of taking inspiration from those types of games, to make it less of just an adrenaline drive and more of a immersive experience where, sometimes you'll even hesitate to see what's around the corner because you never know what's there.
That's really cool. Sorry, continue.
But, we still want it to feel like you're earning a power fantasy, and we still want it to feel like a fast-paced, aggressive game in between all of that. So we have to work a lot on balancing both of those aspects.
That is awesome because, a huge part of what makes those games specifically is the power fantasy. Like when you're running around as the Doom Marine in Doom and you're just like absolutely slaughtering these aliens in these just over-the-top, ridiculous, gory animations. It just makes you feel so powerful. And that is a huge part of what makes those games. So it's really cool that you're tackling that.
Doom Eternal, where you're killing all the demons with the glory kills and stuff,
Yes.
like when you kill a demon normally, you still feel pretty badass. But when you get that glory kill in and it's this animation, like you're snapping the arm and shoving the bone into the head kind of thing, or tearing off the arm and smacking them in the face with it, or even the bonk, where you just straight up pummels their head into their chest kind of thing. As funny as that is, it still feels satisfying when you get those kills, and we will have some type of kill system in the game, but it won't be as advanced as Doom Eternal or even Doom 2016. It's going to be a lot more subtle, but it's still going to feel amazing when it happens.
Hell yeah! Well, that's awesome, and honestly, the way that you're talking about this, and when you're describing the games that have influenced you and your team with making it, as well as the music, I'm really looking forward to playing it myself. So, which brings me to my next question. When can we expect to see this game? Because you've mentioned, of course, having had to downsize your team dramatically because of the COVID-19 outbreak. So do you guys have a timeline based upon how your company is looking right now? Or has the COVID-19 outbreak just kind of thrown everything like out the window? Has it made everything super topsy-turvy? What's going on with that?
So this outbreak has made everything tough because it was one of the minor reasons why we decided to break it up, but mostly it was because of financials. As a startup, we don't have any official backing. We don't have investors. We don't have, crowdfunding set up yet. We aren't even a registered company. So, for that's a scary place to be for a startup company, trying to get all your legal shit straight, trying to, work jobs to raise money for this company. So even with the setbacks, we still have, our scripter on board. We still have a lot of the main people who were doing most of the work. So other than, us having to relook at everything, we're hopefully expecting early access to this game to be out by at least 2022. If we do have to push it, we will apologize and we will announce, a set date, hopefully, for when we plan to release the first level of the game, because even getting out the first level to us will take a lot of weight off our shoulders, because I know Yandere-chan, or Yandere Dev, whatever you want to call him, is a big meme on the internet right now. But, he introduced a concept known as a V-slice, which I didn't even know about, where you basically make a small chunk of your game, like one level or one area, that's a fully completed game. Albeit you might change a couple of things here and there for, streamlining or refining purposes. But, you basically present this V-slice to investors and to fans to basically say, we are actually working on this. This is what we have. This is basically how the game will look, how it will play. This is what you can expect from the rest of the game when it's released. And we want to give some people early access, but not everyone. We do want to eventually release the first level publicly, but we're hoping to reach out to, YouTubers and other types of people who are interested in these types of games and asking them to just play it for review, give a very brutally honest review about it, because we want to hear all of their complaints and all of their praises so that we can make sure that we build this game to what our fans want, because our number one priority is our community. And, we can make a game, we can make whatever game we want. We can make an 18-plus game, we can make an early education game, or we can just make this awesome kick-ass 90s metal game. But if our fans don't like it, then obviously we did something wrong and we fucked up. We're not going to tailor to every single fan. It's impossible to try to please everyone.
That's very true.
And we understand that. But, we are looking at having the majority of our fan base come back and say, even if they only played the first level and then never touched it again, at least they were able to say, I enjoy this experience. It sounded very cool. The music was kicking. I love the guns. I love the enemy design. And a lot of them, we think will come back just to play the first episode when it's released, because we're releasing episodes in separate time frames so that we aren't overworked. We'll sort of release the first episode, focus on, clearing up any bugs or anything that the community reports, and our QA testers and play testers, sort of report, maybe this part is too hard, so we'll notch it down just a tiny bit. But the game is meant to be a harder game. It is a 90s game. It's not meant to handhold you in any way.
Of course.
So, if you run out of ammo, tough luck. You got to use your pitchfork, son. You got to go around and stab aliens in the butt and the eye with this pitchfork until you, find some ammo.
Awesome. Well, hey, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I will leak all the weapons right now because I can and I want to.
Go ahead, go for it.
And if anybody steals this, I'll file an IC3 report and have your house swatted. No, I won't. But oh well, fuck it.
Well, the floor is yours.
You have small PP. So we have two types of human weapons. Two types of humans. We have two types of weapons, which are human and alien. So we have the pitchfork, the assault rifle, the legendary sawed-off shotgun, and the flamethrower is your human weapons. They pack a pretty good punch, especially the sawed-off shotgun, because the double barrel is a staple for basically every single game ever invented in the 90s. So why not, give our players a super shotgun, or a double barrel, or a sawed-off, whatever they want to call it. We don't really care. Then we have the alien weapons. You have your ray gun, which will act as your pistol, and no, it doesn't have unlimited ammo. We aren't going to throw you that bone. You have your plasma rifle, your tri-laser shotgun, which is actually, which stole the auto barrel rotating idea from Doom Eternal. So it's an automatic shotgun, basically. You have your railgun, your atom launcher, which is just a fancy name for a rocket launcher, and the mother of all guns, which I won't tell you exactly what that one is, but keep a lookout for the secrets around the levels, and you'll eventually understand what the mother of all guns is.
The MOAG, for short.
We call it the Moog.
The Moog. I like that better. It sounds better.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, hey, that about does it for our time, actually. But before I let you go, Richard, is there anything else that you want to say regarding the game? You want to say to maybe prospective fans out there, or to the local metal scene? Anything else that you want to let us know?
Actually, there is one thing. PolyHeart is planning at some time after Swarm's first episode. We're planning on holding a concert for charity, actually. It's still a lot of talk in the works. It's not confirmed, but we are hoping to do something to give back to our local community, which is actually going to be a metal concert with as many of the bands who participated in the heavy metal choir as possible.
Hell yes.
And, we're going to see if any of them would like to come forward and play this show. And all the tickets bought will go towards, a charity of our choice, whichever is, like, the biggest thing. If it's a COVID-19 thing, if it's, there was another flood over in Haiti kind of thing. But we are going to try to keep most of it local. We do have some international bands and some Canadian bands, but we are looking at keeping everything Canadian.
Awesome. Well, hey, I honestly, that sounds like a really worthwhile cause. So I really hope that things are able to go through, and that of course, I hope this outbreak, this pandemic, ends as fast as possible, so that we can all go back to our normal lives, and that stuff like this can, that you can get your game back on track and make things come out quicker, and also so that people can, go out to shows again, because personally, that's something that I miss a lot right now. Just not being able to go out at all. But hopefully it ends and we're able to get back to that normal sense of life.
Because I recently turned 19 March 13th. So I was actually looking forward to going to shows, and then this hit. But the one thing I do want to tell everybody is, I know this is a hard time mentally and physically for some people, but you really have to just, stay chill, get through it. It'll eventually be over. I know it's hard. It really changed a lot of our lives, but, you just have to do what you can, wash your hands, practice social distancing, and eventually this will all be over.
Absolutely. That's all we got to do is just, exactly like you said, just practice social distancing, wash your hands, and just persevere, and eventually everything will go back to normal, hopefully. But, I just want to say, Richard, thank you so much for taking the time to come on here onto the Heavy Newfoundland podcast and talk to us about your game, about Swarm. It sounds like a really interesting project, and I'm super looking forward to playing it when it does eventually come out, at least the first episode, of course. So I wish you and your team at PolyHeart the best of luck, and stay safe.
Yeah, of course, and I will give you a personal invitation to the heavy metal choir and where it is and whatever, when we get closer to figuring out everything in 2021.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
All right. Well, this has been the Heavy Newfoundland podcast, of course. Interview with Richard Furey over at PolyHeart Games, and I will see you next time. All right. Take care.